I got this postcard in the mail today. It's not for me, but I'll get to that later. I recently got back from New York, and it got me thinking about the sketching techniques I use when I travel. Usually, my main goal is to sketch a scene very quickly because I don't want to take time away from my friends and my family, but I also want the sketch to be accurate. So I decided to make this video to show you my tried and true method for sketching a complex scene. By the end of the video, you'll learn how to take what you see in real life and turn it into a beautifully minimal sketch. And as a bonus, I'll tell you why this showed up at my doorstep. Whenever I decide to sketch a scene, my first emotion is usually to feel overwhelmed. There are so many moving parts, noises, and distractions. On the morning I sketched this scene, this is what I saw. And my challenge was to go from this very complex and detailed scene to this minimal sketch. The key thing here is to focus on your scene and block out everything else. Let's go back to the scene for a second and try to figure out where the focal points are. We'll zoom in to take a closer look. Now this is just for demonstration. On location, you have to do this in your mind. It'll take some practice, but if you're starting out, feel free to take photos on your phone and zoom in and out. Now that we're in close, I can see the two areas I'd like to focus on. First is the World Trade Center Tower, since that's the largest, and second is the ferry. The ferry is moving away from the tower, so there's some tension and there's a bit of a story building. There you go. Now you know exactly what to focus your sketch on, and you can forget about everything else. But if you start to sketch now, that would be a mistake. Now I bet you're thinking that this is going to take too long. Sketching is supposed to be fun, and all of this is just making it boring. But think about it this way. Doing the work up front will make sure that you have a stunning sketch each and every time. And the really cool part is, the more you do this, the better you become, and the quicker the process is. Before you know it, this will be second nature. The next step is thumbnailing. Why thumbnailing? Well, the last thing you want to do is to drive straight into a sketch, and halfway through, you realize that you drew something way too big, way too small, you ran out of space, or there's way too much space. You don't have to do too many thumbnails. I like to start with 3 and add more if I need them. The general idea is to lay out your subjects so they are proportionate and balanced on your page. After 5 thumbnails, I now know how I'll compose my sketch. Let's take a look at each one to see why they work or don't work. The first thumbnail is too top heavy. There's a lot of sky and it doesn't focus enough on my subjects. The second one, more of my subject, but the sketch is unbalanced because the building is touching the top of the page. The third is the same problem as the first, but instead of too much sky, it's a lot of water. It still doesn't focus enough on my subjects. The fourth one focuses too much on the subjects, but doesn't show much of the setting to put them into context. Now the fifth one balances all of the elements perfectly for what I want. The boat and the buildings are centered, neither the sky nor the water takes up too much space. Now you have a perfectly balanced composition ready for sketching. Well, not exactly. There's still one more thing I want to talk about. Looking at the final sketch, can you tell me what it is? Since I've already isolated my subject and used thumbnails to compose the scene, I can start sketching. And I'd get something good, but I want great. To understand what will make this sketch great, let's talk about atmospheric perspective. Don't worry, this isn't an art school lecture. This will be quick and you'll be implementing it in no time. You're probably familiar with linear perspective. That's your 1-point and 2-point perspective. It essentially means objects closer in distance are larger than objects further away. Atmospheric perspective, also known as aerial perspective, is fairly similar. But instead of using size to show distance, you use detail. In atmospheric perspective, objects closer in distance have more detail and texture, and they have more contrast against the other objects. Atmospheric perspective is a lot more complicated than my simplified definition, but for this scene, that's all you need to know. Now you're probably thinking, other than the ferry, all the buildings are about the same distance away from me. And you'd be right. So for this sketch, I didn't use atmospheric perspective to show distance. I used its principles to selectively add details to guide the viewer's focus. Remember in step 1 when we established that the World Trade Center Tower and the ferry would be the focal point? Well, when I drew them, I made sure to add the details and the intricacies. You can see the separation from the trade center to the buildings around it. You can see the details on the ferry. But just as important, notice what doesn't have any details. As you move to the right or the left of the focal point, the buildings lose detail. The pen lines are lighter, and the shapes just kind of blend in together. Now that you know how to take a real-life scene, understand what to focus on, lay out the composition, and add atmospheric perspective principles to give it that final touch, there's just one more thing to show you. Remember when I said this postcard wasn't for me? Well, let's see who it's for. I don't think she really cares. This sketch took me 7 minutes to do and is now a permanent keepsake from this trip. Goose may not understand atmospheric perspective, but now you do. And you see how it brings you one step closer to effortlessly sketching complex scenes. But do you know what takes you 10 steps backwards? Answer this. Are you perfect? I'm pretty sure the answer is no. So why does your sketches have to be perfect? Perfectionism can actually hold you back as an artist and stop your growth. Check out this video here where I chat about all of the things perfectionism stops you from doing and the easy to implement ways of breaking free.